She had one heartbeat to decide. Let the Korean Mafia boss drink the poison meant for him, or grab the glass from his hand in front of 200 armed syndicate members and sign her own death warrant. Her fingers were already moving before her mind caught up. Guards reached for weapons. His future wife's smile sharpened like a blade. And Nyla Monroe did the one thing a background operative should never do. She made herself visible. Hey, besties. Before we dive into this, I need you to do something. Comment below and tell me, would you risk everything to save a stranger? Your engagement fuels these stories. Hit subscribe because what Nyla does next will shatter everything you think you know about survival. Let's start this journey with a story about a woman who refused to stay invisible. The gala froze. Not silent. Worse. The kind of suspended animation where 200 predators simultaneously calculate threat levels. Champagne flutes paused midair. Conversations severed mid-syllable. Men who'd built empires on violence shifted subtly, hands drifting toward concealed firearms. Jamin Park didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still in his wine-red accented suit, the dragon tattoo on his neck visible above his collar. The most lethal man in Seoul, suddenly the center of a storm he hadn't seen coming. Nyla's collision with his arm lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in those seconds, she felt her entire carefully constructed invisibility shatter. She was going to die. The certainty hit her with physical force. As the poisoned glass tumbled from his grip, she'd made it look like an accident, a clumsy server. She pressed something into his palm, a data chip, warm, containing everything. Her mouth barely reached his ear, her voice low and controlled despite the terror screaming through her veins. The bride. Recorded confession. Don't react. Hands seized her immediately. Security guards yanked her backward with enough force to nearly snap her shoulder. Someone shouted in Korean. Someone else cursed in Mandarin. Chairs scraped concrete as syndicate bosses stood, reading the room for blood. What is this disruption? The bride-to-be's voice cut through the chaos, smooth, controlled, but with an edge of something darker. Remove her from my husband's presence. Nyla didn't resist. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might crack her ribs, but her eyes stayed locked on Jamin's face. She needed to see something, anything, that told her she hadn't just destroyed the only cover identity that kept her alive. For one suspended moment, his expression remained unreadable. Then his fingers closed around the chip. It was subtle, barely noticeable. It changed everything. Enough. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The room went silent. Let her go. The guards hesitated. Sir, she assaulted? Jamin's gaze cut through the man like surgical steel. I said. He repeated with lethal calm, release her. They complied instantly. A ripple of shock passed through the criminal elite like an electric current. The bride stared at him, fury and disbelief warring across her perfectly composed features. Jamin, you cannot be serious. She just humiliated me, us, in front of everyone who matters. He didn't look at her. His cold eyes, softening by a fraction only Nyla could detect, never left the Black American woman who'd just saved his life. Everyone out, he said. The celebration is over. They escorted her through corridors she'd memorized during 3 months of deep cover. Service hallways, private elevators, spaces where the Park family's real business happened away from public performance. The room had no windows. 1 table, 2 chairs. Fluorescent lighting that made everything feel like an interrogation. The door closed. Locked. Nyla sat slowly, forcing her hands to stay steady in her lap. Her mind replayed the bride's voice from the service corridor 2 hours earlier. Casual, almost bored. After the wedding, obviously. Accidents are so common with men in his position. And with everything transferred to my name. Nyla's throat tightened. She should have extracted immediately. Should have reported to her American handlers and disappeared into witness protection. But then she'd remembered Jamin's rare smile earlier that evening. Genuinely warm, unguarded for once. accepting congratulations from people who would publicly mourn him while privately carving up his empire. Her chest constricted. She'd make the same choice again. The door opened. Jae-min stepped inside alone. He closed it behind him and locked it himself. The sound echoed with finality. Nyla stood instantly. "I can explain." "Sit." Something in his tone, not threatening but absolute, made her obey without thinking. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he walked to the table and placed the data chip down carefully between them. "I listened to the recording," he said. Her throat tightened. "All of it?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them like piano wire. "Then you know why I did it," she whispered. "I know what you heard," he corrected, his pale golden skin almost luminous under the harsh lights. "What I don't know is why an embedded intelligence operative would burn her entire cover to warn me." Her breath caught. He knew. Of course he knew. "I wasn't doing it for tactical advantage," she said before she could stop herself. His eyebrow lifted slightly. "Then for what?" "For me," she said quietly. "Because I couldn't live with knowing and doing nothing." He studied her. Not like a criminal studies prey. Not like a boss studies an employee. Like a man trying to understand something that violated every rule of his world. She'd spent 3 months embedded in this operation. 3 months becoming invisible, learning patterns, mapping exits. 3 months watching Jae-min Park command his empire with cold precision while his fiancé smiled and plotted his murder. The smart move was to let it happen. Extract. File the report. Collect her paycheck from Langley and disappear into the next assignment. But then Jae-min laughed at something one of his men said, and for just a moment the mask dropped. He looked human, unguarded, unaware that the woman beside him had already picked out his coffin. Nyla's feet were moving before her brain authorized the decision. She crossed the marble floor with the practiced invisibility of someone trained to blend into backgrounds. To be overlooked, to survive by not being seen. Until this moment. Until she grabbed his wrist just as the glass touched his lips. Time fractured. His eyes, cold, sharp, deadly, locked onto hers. She saw the calculation there, the instant assessment of threat. Her hand was shaking. She couldn't stop it. "Trust me," she whispered. And then she did the only thing her panicked mind could conceive to get his undivided attention without speaking the words that would get them both killed. She kissed him. Not gentle. Not romantic. Desperate. Her lips crashed against his as her other hand knocked the poisoned glass from his grip. It shattered against the marble like a gunshot. The room erupted into chaos. If you love a woman who takes charge when everyone else stays silent, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next will change both their lives forever, and you won't want to miss a single moment of Nyla and Jaemin's story. Like this video if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me, would you have stayed invisible, or would you have risked everything? Jae-min didn't move for a long moment after her admission. Then he straightened, his expression shifting from curiosity to cold calculation. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't a request. Before Nyla could respond, he was already moving toward the door. 2 guards appeared instantly. "Prepare the car," he ordered. "We're going to the estate." The mountain estate. Nyla had read about it in classified briefings. Park Jae-min's fortress, where even his own family needed permission to enter. The place where problems disappeared permanently. Her pulse spiked. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me." He turned, and something in his eyes made her words die. "You saved my life tonight. That means you're either extraordinarily brave or working for someone who wants me to owe them a debt. Either way, you're not safe here. And neither am I until I understand which one you are." The drive took 2 hours. Nyla watched Seoul's glittering lights fade into darkness, replaced by winding mountain roads that seemed to lead nowhere. The estate emerged from the shadows like something out of a fever dream. Traditional Korean architecture merged with modern security that would make a military installation jealous. High walls, cameras, guards who moved with the precision of former special forces. The moment they arrived, Jaemin dismissed everyone. The silence that followed felt heavier than the chaos at the gala. They stood in a vast living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley below. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a cage made of glass and steel. "How did you know?" His voice cut through the quiet. He'd removed his jacket, and she could see the full dragon tattoo now, curling up his neck and disappearing beneath his collar. "How does a foreigner, an American intelligence operative, identify a poison meant specifically for me?" Nyla met his gaze directly. "Because I've been watching your bride-to-be for 3 months. She's been meeting with a chemist in Gangnam. Custom synthesis. Tasteless, colorless, mimics a heart attack. She needed something that wouldn't raise suspicions during an autopsy." His jaw tightened. "You've been surveilling my fiancé." "I've been surveilling a suspected arms dealer who happens to be your fiancé," Nyla corrected. "You were collateral damage I wasn't willing to accept." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe respect. "Your government sent you to stop an arms deal by saving a criminal's life?" "My government doesn't know I did this," she said quietly. "I went off mission the moment I grabbed that glass." The admission hung between them like a blade. Jae-min stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the intimate space. "You threw away your career, your safety, your cover? For what? A man you don't know? A criminal?" "For the truth," Nyla said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Because the woman you were going to marry isn't just an arms dealer. She's planning to trigger a gang war that will kill hundreds, and you were the first domino she needed to fall." His eyes searched hers, looking for deception, for weakness, for anything that would help him categorize her into something he understood. He found nothing but conviction. "You're either the most dangerous woman I've ever met," he said softly, "or the most honest one." "Maybe I'm both," Nyla replied. The corner of his mouth lifted. Barely, but it was there. "Then we have a problem, because now I don't know whether to protect you or fear you." "You could try trusting me," she suggested. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Trust. In my world, that's the fastest way to die." "And yet," Neela said, "I'm still breathing." If you think Nyla should trust Jae-min despite everything she knows about his world, hit that like button right now. And subscribe, because what happens next will test every boundary they thought they had. Jae-min didn't move to stop her when she stood abruptly, chair scraping against concrete. "I need to leave," Nyla said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My cover's burned. I have extraction protocols." "You think your protocols matter now?" His tone wasn't mocking, just factual. "Everyone at that gala saw you touch me, saw me protect you. In my world, that makes you mine." "I'm not yours," she snapped, the words sharper than intended. "I'm not anyone's. I don't need protection. I need distance." He stood then, hands sliding into his pockets with deliberate calm. "Distance won't save you from what's coming. I've survived worse than angry syndicate wives. Have you survived entire families who see you as leverage?" He tilted his head slightly, that dragon tattoo catching the light. "Because that's what you became the moment I chose you over her." Nyla's jaw tightened. "Then that's your problem, not mine." She moved toward the door. He didn't follow, just watched with those cold eyes that somehow burned. The lock clicked open at her approach. One of his guards had released it remotely. She should have felt relief. Instead, her instincts screamed warning. The corridor stretched empty before her. Too empty. She walked anyway, boots echoing against marble, each step carrying her toward the estate's main entrance. Her mind was already calculating. Closest safe house, which handler to contact. How fast she could disappear into Seoul's underbelly. She pushed through the heavy front doors and stopped cold. The circular driveway wasn't empty. Black sedans lined the perimeter like predators circling prey. Men in tailored suits stood beside them, faces she recognized from the gala. Mid-level enforcers, soldiers, the kind who followed orders without question. At least 20 of them, all watching her. One stepped forward. He didn't draw a weapon. Didn't need to. "Mr. Park requests you return inside." "Mr. Park can request all he wants," Nyla said, her voice carrying across the too quiet courtyard. "I'm leaving." "No," the man said simply. "You're not." Her hand instinctively moved toward where her concealed weapon should have been. Gone. They'd taken it during the interrogation. Of course they had. Behind her, she heard the soft fall of expensive shoes against marble. Jamin's presence registered before he spoke. "I told you," he said quietly, stopping just close enough that she felt his warmth at her back. "Distance won't save you." She didn't turn around. "So what is this? A golden cage?" "This is reality." His voice dropped lower. "The moment you saved me, you declared which side you chose. They won't forget that. Neither will I." "I didn't choose a side," she said, still watching the armed perimeter. "I chose a person." Silence stretched between them. Then his hand appeared in her peripheral vision. Not grabbing, just offered. "Then let me return the favor." Nyla's fingers curled into fists. Every tactical bone in her body screamed to fight, to run, to maintain the independence that kept her alive through 3 years of deep cover. But the men surrounding the estate weren't making empty threats. And the man behind her, the one she'd risked everything to save, was offering something she'd never had. Partnership, not ownership. She hated that part of her wanted to take his hand. "If I stay," she said slowly, still not looking at him, "I'm not your possession. I'm not your weakness. I'm your equal or I'm gone." Agreed. The answer came too quickly, too easily. She finally turned, meeting those pale gold eyes that softened only for her. "You're lying." "I'm compromising," he corrected. "There's a difference." The corner of her mouth lifted despite everything. "I don't trust you." "Good," Jamin said. "Trust is earned. I intend to earn it." His hand remained extended between them, an offer, not a demand. Around them, 20 armed men waited for her decision. Behind her, the gate to freedom stood open but useless. Nyla looked at his hand, at the dragon tattoo crawling up his neck, at the man who'd built an empire on violence but was offering her choice. She took his hand. "If you want to see Nyla fight back against everything trying to control her, comment "stay" below. And if you're invested in this power couple's dangerous dance, hit that subscribe button and like this video, because their collision is just beginning. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when two unstoppable forces decide to fight together instead of apart. 3 weeks into the paper marriage, Nyla learned something crucial about Jamin Park. The man who never flinched in boardrooms, who stared down armed rivals without blinking. Who commanded an empire with surgical precision. That man was slowly breaking under a weight no one else could see. She found him past midnight in his private study, a room she'd been told never to enter without invitation. But the guards had looked at her differently, nodded her through with something like concern in their eyes, and she understood. He needed someone, and somehow, impossibly, she'd become that someone. The study was dark, except for a single desk lamp casting long shadows across walls lined with books in Korean, English, and Japanese. Jamin sat in the leather chair behind his desk, jacket discarded, shirt unbuttoned halfway, tie abandoned somewhere she couldn't see. His head was tilted back, eyes closed, one hand pressed against his chest like he was trying to hold something inside that wanted desperately to escape. He didn't open his eyes when she entered, but his voice emerged quiet and raw. "You shouldn't be here." "The guards let me through," Nyla said, closing the door softly behind her. "They shouldn't have. They're worried about you." She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. I'm worried about you. His laugh was bitter, foreign coming from a man who never showed weakness. You've known me 3 weeks. You don't know me well enough to worry. I know you haven't slept in 4 days, she said, reaching the desk. I know you take calls at 3 in the morning and pretend they don't tear pieces from you. I know you sit in this room alone and carry things no one person should have to carry. His eyes opened then, and what she saw in them made her breath catch. Not the cold calculation she'd grown accustomed to. Not the dangerous charm he used like a weapon, just exhaustion, just humanity. My father built this empire on blood, he said quietly. My grandfather before him, and I inherited it like a kingdom, except kingdoms don't require you to sign death warrants before breakfast. He looked down at his hands. Today I had to choose between protecting 20 families or sacrificing 3. I chose the 20. I'm told that makes me a good leader. Nyla rounded the desk slowly. It makes you human. Human leaders don't survive in my world. Then maybe, she said, standing directly in front of him now, your world needs to change. Something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe, or the ghost of it. His gaze traveled over her, taking in her presence in his private sanctuary, wearing nothing but sleep shorts and one of his dress shirts she'd borrowed. Her long black hair loose around her shoulders, her deep ebony skin luminous even in the dim light. You're the only thing in my life that feels real anymore, he admitted, the words seeming to surprise him as much as her. Nyla's heart stuttered. She'd felt the shift between them over the past weeks, moments where the contract felt less like protection and more like pretense. Times when his hand lingered at the small of her back longer than necessary. Instances when she caught herself watching him across rooms, memorizing the way he moved, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face. Jamin, she said softly, and his name on her lips seemed to undo something inside him. He reached for her then, pulling her gently between his legs, his hands settling at her waist with a reverence that made her dizzy. His forehead came to rest against her stomach, and she felt the shudder that ran through his entire body. I should have died that night at the gala, he whispered against the fabric of his borrowed shirt. The poison was supposed to be my end. Clean. Final. Easier than this. Her hands moved instinctively to his hair, fingers threading through the black strands she'd only admired from a distance. But you didn't die. No. His arms tightened around her. You saved me, and now I don't know if that was mercy or cruelty. Look at me, she commanded softly. He raised his head, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her. This was the man beneath the dragon tattoo, beneath the tailored armor, beneath the reputation that made grown men afraid. This was Jamin, just Jamin, and he was falling apart. It was mercy, Nyla said, cupping his face between her hands, her thumbs brushing across his sharp jawline. Because you deserve more than poison and political marriages and carrying your family's sins alone. I don't deserve you, he said. And it wasn't self-pity. It was confession. That's not your decision to make. The air between them changed then, charged with everything they'd been carefully not saying, not acknowledging, not allowing themselves to feel. The contract had given them permission to be close. But this was something the contract couldn't contain. If I kiss you now, Jamin said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and desperate, it won't be for show. It won't be strategy. It won't be... Nyla kissed him before he could finish, and it was nothing like the collision at the gala or the careful affection they'd performed for watching eyes. This was need meeting need, loneliness finding company. 2 people who'd survived by never letting anyone close suddenly unable to maintain any distance at all. His hands slid up her back, pulling her impossibly closer as he stood, lifting her effortlessly onto the edge of his desk, papers scattered. Something fell with a distant crash neither of them cared about. His mouth moved from her lips to her jaw, her neck, the hollow of her throat, each kiss both question and answer. Tell me to stop. He breathed against her skin. Tell me this is insane and we're violating every term of our agreement and— Don't stop, Nyla said, and her voice was steady even as her hands trembled while unbuttoning the rest of his shirt. Don't you dare stop. The fabric slid from his shoulders, revealing the full extent of the dragon tattoo that curled up his neck and across his left shoulder, black ink stark against pale golden skin. She traced the lines with her fingers, feeling him shiver beneath her touch, and understood suddenly what the dragon represented. Not power, but protection. Not violence, but vigilance. You're beautiful, she whispered, and watched his eyes close like the words physically affected him. So are you, he said, opening his eyes to hold her gaze. So beautiful it terrifies me. They moved from the desk to the leather sofa in the corner, a tangle of careful urgency and whispered confessions. Every touch became a conversation. Every kiss became a promise they hadn't known they were making. The contract between them had been about survival, about strategy, about practical protection in an impractical world. This was about something neither of them had planned for, and both of them desperately needed. When Nyla's borrowed shirt joined his on the floor, when his hands mapped the curves of her body like he was memorizing sacred text, when she pulled him closer and heard his breath catch with something like reverence. That was when the walls truly crumbled. They made love slowly, carefully, intensely, as if they both understood this was a threshold they couldn't uncross, a transformation that would rewrite every careful boundary they'd constructed. His forehead pressed against hers as they moved together, and she saw tears at the corners of his eyes, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen. I love you, he whispered in Korean first, then English, like he needed her to understand in every language he knew. I love you, and it's the most terrifying thing I've ever felt. Nyla's response was both simpler and more complex. She kissed him again, poured everything she couldn't articulate into the connection between them, and let him feel what words couldn't capture. Afterwards, they lay tangled together on the sofa, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her bare shoulder. The dragon tattoo rose and fell with his breathing, and Nyla traced its curves with one finger. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now, Jaemin said, pressing a kiss to her hair. Everything changes. Again. She smiled against his skin. I'm starting to think everything changing is just our normal. Then I choose this normal, he said. Every time, every version, as long as it includes you. The study's darkness felt less oppressive now, transformed from a prison of responsibility into a sanctuary of honesty. Outside, Seoul continued its relentless pulse. Inside, two people who'd married for survival discovered something far more dangerous. A reason to actually live. Subscribe to this channel, Nyla murmured sleepily. If you want to see how two people break every rule and somehow make it work. Jaemin laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. That's my line for business negotiations. Then consider this a hostile takeover, she said, and felt his chest rumble with more laughter. Hostile nothing, he replied, holding her closer. You walked in and conquered without firing a shot. And in that moment, wrapped in each other in the aftermath of walls crumbling, neither of them wanted to be anywhere else. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next? When enemies discover the marriage isn't just strategy anymore, we'll test everything these two have built. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Jaemin woke to find Nyla's side of the bed cold. He'd learned her patterns over the past 3 weeks. She slept lightly, woke before dawn, always positioned herself near exits even in sleep. Survival instincts didn't fade just because the immediate threat had passed. But this morning felt different. The apartment was too quiet, the kind of silence that preceded bad news. He found her in the kitchen, standing motionless by the window, still wearing his shirt from the night before. Her phone was clutched in her hand, Knuckles tight, body rigid with the kind of tension he recognized from his own mirror. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She didn't turn. "Someone from my past just landed in Seoul." Before he could respond, his own phone vibrated. An unknown number. He answered it the way he answered all unknown calls now, with measured caution and complete attention. The voice on the other end was American. Rough. Confident in a way that came from years of wielding authority without accountability. "Mr. Park, my name is Detective Marcus Webb, Chicago PD. I think we need to talk about the woman you've been harboring." Jamin's gaze never left Nyla. Her shoulders had gone rigid at the sound of the voice bleeding through his phone's speaker. She knew exactly who was calling. "I'm listening," Jamin said. "I'm in Seoul on police business. Tracked a fugitive all the way from the States. Imagine my surprise when I discovered she's been living in your penthouse. Nyla Monroe. Or should I say, Nyla Richardson. She's got warrants, Mr. Park. Multiple jurisdictions. I've got documentation, photos, witness statements, the works." Nyla finally turned. Her face had gone carefully blank, but her eyes were pleading with him to let her explain before he made any decisions. "Where are you?" Jamin asked the detective. "Millennium Seoul Hilton, room 1847. I'll be here until noon tomorrow. After that, I file official extradition paperwork with the Korean authorities. But I figure a man of your reputation might prefer to handle this privately. Keep your name out of international investigations. You understand." The line went dead. Nyla set her phone down with deliberate care, like it might explode if handled roughly. "He's lying." "Explain." She exhaled slowly. "Marcus Webb was my partner's handler. 3 years ago, I was working undercover in Chicago. Deep cover, organized crime syndicate. My partner, Detective Sarah Chen, was feeding information to the people we were supposed to be investigating. When I reported it, Webb buried my evidence. Said I was unstable. Fabricated reports. By the time Internal Affairs looked into it, Sarah was dead and I was the convenient scapegoat." Jamin's expression didn't change. "And the warrants he mentioned?" "Real," she admitted. "Obstruction of justice. Filing false reports, assault on a peace officer, all charges Webb manufactured after I refused to stay quiet. I didn't run from guilt, Jamin. I ran from a system that chose to believe a corrupt cop over an honest one." He studied her face the way he'd studied her that first night, looking for the truth beneath the words, the micro-expressions that betrayed lies. He found none. Just exhaustion and the particular brand of fear that came from knowing the truth wouldn't save you. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Because I've learned that the moment you tell someone about your past, they start looking at you differently. They start questioning everything. Start wondering if maybe the accusations have merit." Her voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't bear for you to look at me like that." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. An email. Sender, M. Webb. Jamin opened it. Attached were police reports, photographs, witness statements. All meticulously documented. All damning. Photos of Nyla with known criminals, which made sense given her undercover work, but without context looked like collaboration. Reports detailing her violent outbursts and delusional accusations against decorated officers. Witness statements from people Jamin didn't recognize, claiming she'd threatened them, stolen evidence, obstructed investigations. The documentation was comprehensive, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a legitimate law enforcement investigation, or from someone with the resources and motivation to manufacture one. Nyla watched his face as he scrolled through the files. She didn't plead, didn't make excuses. Just waited for him to decide whether she was the woman who'd saved his life or the fugitive criminal Webb claimed. "I need to meet him," Jamin said finally. Her breath caught. "You believe him." "I didn't say that." He set his phone down and crossed to her, cupping her face with both hands. "But if I'm going to protect you from this, I need to understand exactly what we're facing. That means looking him in the eye and deciding which version of the truth holds weight." She leaned into his touch despite herself. He's dangerous, Jaemin. Not in the way you're dangerous. He's got a badge and a system that protects him. And I've got resources he can't imagine and no particular fondness for corrupt authority figures. His thumb brushed her cheek. Trust me. I do, she whispered. That's what terrifies me. If you're invested in whether Jaemin will choose Nyla or believe the evidence, hit that like button right now and subscribe because this confrontation is about to get intense. 2 hours later, Jaemin stood outside room 1847 at the Millennium Seoul Hilton. He'd come alone, as requested, though 3 of his most trusted men were positioned strategically throughout the hotel. The dragon tattoo on his neck was visible above his collar. A deliberate choice. Let Webb see exactly who he was dealing with. The door opened before he could knock. Marcus Webb was exactly what Jaemin expected. Mid-50s, weathered face, eyes that had seen too much and stopped caring somewhere along the way. The kind of cop who'd started idealistic and ended cynical, who'd crossed enough lines that the distinction between law and crime had blurred into irrelevance. Mr. Park, appreciate you coming. Webb gestured him inside. The hotel room was standard business class. Laptop open on the desk, files spread across the bed, half-empty whiskey bottle on the nightstand. Webb dressed like a cop even on foreign soil. Cheap suit, cheaper tie, shoes that prioritized function over fashion. You wanted to talk, Jaemin said. Talk. Webb picked up a manila folder from the bed. Nyla Richardson, real name. She abandoned it 3 years ago after fleeing Chicago with outstanding warrants. Before that, she was a decorated undercover operative. Smart, capable, also unstable. History of fabricating evidence, making wild accusations against colleagues. Violent confrontations with superior officers. Or, Jaemin said calmly, she was a good cop who discovered corruption and got buried for it. Webb's smile was patronizing. That's what they all say, but the evidence doesn't lie. He tossed the folder to Jaemin. That's just a fraction of what I've got. Enough to have her extradited within 48 hours. Korean authorities tend to cooperate with American law enforcement, especially on fugitive cases. Jaemin flipped through the folder without sitting. Police reports, court documents, arrest warrants, all official, all authentic looking. What do you want? He asked. Smart man. Webb poured himself whiskey. I want Nyla, but I'm willing to be reasonable. You're a businessman. I'm a businessman. We can work something out. You're a blackmailer. Webb shrugged. Semantics. Point is, you've got something I want. I've got the power to make your life extremely complicated. We can both walk away happy, or this gets ugly in public and drags your name through every international law enforcement database. Your choice. Jaemin set the folder down carefully. How much? $2 million, US dollars. Wire transfer to an account I'll provide. In exchange, I fly back to Chicago. These warrants mysteriously get lost in bureaucratic paperwork, and Nyla gets to keep playing house with Seoul's most notorious reformed crime boss. Webb's smile widened. Good deal, considering what you'd spend on lawyers if this goes official. Jaemin walked to the window, looking out over Seoul's skyline. He'd built his empire by reading people, knowing when they were lying, when they were desperate. When they thought they held cards they didn't actually have. Marcus Webb thought he held all the cards. He was wrong. I'll need 48 hours, Jaemin said, turning back. To arrange that kind of transfer without raising flags. Webb nodded, satisfied. 48 hours, but Nyla stays put. No sudden trips, no disappearances. And Mr. Park? His voice hardened. Don't try anything creative. I've got copies of everything filed with colleagues back home. If something happens to me, those documents go straight to Korean authorities and the FBI. Clear? Crystal, Jaemin said. He left without another word. In the elevator, he pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. The first was to his head of security. The second was to a contact in Korean National Police he'd cultivated over years of strategic donations and mutual favors. The third was to a private investigator in Chicago who specialized in police corruption cases. By the time he returned to the penthouse, he had a strategy. Nyla was waiting where he'd left her, now dressed, phone in hand, ready to run if he gave the word. "Well?" she asked. "He wants $2 million, 48 hours. Her face went pale. "You can't pay him. He'll just come back. They always come back." "I'm not paying him." Jamin crossed to her, taking her hands. They were ice cold. "But I need to know everything, every detail about Chicago, about Sarah Chen, about Webb, about what really happened 3 years ago." "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "I'm going to destroy him, but I need ammunition." She searched his face. "You believe me?" It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "I believe you saved my life when you could have walked away. I believe you've never lied to me about who you are. And I believe Marcus Webb is exactly the kind of corrupt authority figure I've spent my life learning to recognize." He pulled her close. "So tell me everything. Leave nothing out." She did. For the next 3 hours, Nyla told him everything. The undercover operation, Sarah Chen's suspicious behavior. The night Nyla discovered Sarah taking payoffs from the very syndicate they were supposed to be investigating. Confronting Webb with evidence, his threats, the falsified reports. Sarah's convenient death in a shootout that conveniently silenced the only person who could corroborate Nyla's story. The manufactured warrants. The system that chose institutional protection over justice. Jamin listened without interruption, his expression growing colder with each revelation. When she finished, he made more calls. If you want to see how Jamin takes down a corrupt cop using his own system against him, make sure you're subscribed. Drop a comment telling me if you think Webb will walk away alive. Part 6 is going to be explosive. Jamin didn't leave the interrogation room immediately after her confession. He remained standing by the table, studying her with an intensity that made Nyla's skin prickle. The fluorescent lights cast sharp shadows across his features, highlighting the dragon tattoo that curled up his neck like a brand of everything he was. Dangerous, deliberate, deadly. "You're a problem," he said finally. Nyla's pulse spiked. "I saved your life." "Exactly." He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat, the movement controlled and precise. "Which means my enemies will now study you, dissect every choice you've made, every connection, every weakness." She swallowed hard. "I can disappear. I'm trained for it." "You were trained for invisibility," he corrected. "But you chose visibility the moment you touched me in front of 200 witnesses. There's no going back from that." The weight of his words settled over her like concrete. She'd known the risks intellectually, but hearing them spoken aloud by the man whose world she'd just disrupted made them visceral, inescapable. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. "You eliminate the liability?" Something flickered across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite respect. "If I wanted you eliminated, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "Then what do you want?" He leaned back slightly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I want to understand why an American intelligence operative with a clean extraction protocol chose professional suicide instead." Nyla's jaw tightened. "I already told you." "You told me the emotional truth," he interrupted. "Now tell me the tactical one. What was your mission objective?" She hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to reveal operational details, but those instincts belonged to a cover identity that no longer existed. The woman who'd spent 3 months serving drinks and gathering intel had died the moment she'd knocked that glass from his hand. "Surveillance," she said finally. "Your organization's international money laundering operations, 6 months embedded, then extraction with enough evidence to build a RICO case. And instead, you burned everything for a man you were supposed to be investigating." "Yes." "Why?" The question hung between them, simple and impossibly complex. "Because," Nyla said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I've spent my entire career watching bad people do bad things to each other. I've documented murders, trafficking, extortion. I've built cases that put monsters away, but I've never... She stopped, forcing herself to meet his eyes. I've never watched someone good get killed by someone worse and done nothing about it. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You think I'm good? I think you have a code, she corrected. I think you protect the people in your territory. I think you don't traffic children or force women into debt slavery. I think compared to what your bride-to-be was planning to build on your corpse, you're practically a saint. Silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the building, she could hear muffled voices, footsteps, the ordinary sounds of an empire conducting business. Your intelligence agency will disavow you, Jae-min said finally. Probably already have. Your government will consider you compromised. Yes. And the woman whose wedding you just destroyed has family connections that span 3 continents and 4 major criminal syndicates. Nyla's stomach dropped. She'd known the bride was connected, but not the scope. So I'm dead either way. Not necessarily. He stood, walking to the far wall where a panel concealed a small safe. He input a code, retrieved a folder, and returned to the table. There is one solution. Risky. Complicated, but effective. He placed the folder in front of her. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning legal documents written in Korean and English. The words swam for a moment before snapping into sharp focus. Marriage contract. Her breath caught. You can't be serious. Completely serious. He sat again, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp as obsidian. A paper marriage. Legally binding. Gives you immunity through spousal privilege, legitimizes your presence in my organization, and provides me with justification to restructure my entire operation. Restructure, she repeated slowly. You mean purge. The bride-to-be wasn't working alone, he said calmly. The recording you provided proves conspiracy, but not the full scope. There are others in my organization who supported her play, who thought I was weak enough to be controlled through marriage, who believed a foreign wife would make me vulnerable. Understanding dawned cold and clear. And an American wife, a Black American intelligence operative who saved your life publicly, sends a completely different message. Exactly. It demonstrates strength, unpredictability. It forces everyone who underestimated me to recalculate their positions. His fingers drummed once against the table. And it keeps you alive long enough to decide what kind of life you want after this is over. Nyla stared at the contract, her mind racing through implications and consequences. This is insane. Yes. People will think you've lost your mind. Let them. Your enemies will come for both of us. They'll try. He leaned forward slightly. But they'll fail. Because unlike my former bride, you actually know how to watch your back. You're trained in counter-surveillance, defensive tactics, threat assessment. You're not a liability pretending to be an asset. You're an actual asset. The clinical assessment should have felt cold, but instead it felt like recognition. Like being seen for what she actually was rather than what she'd been pretending to be. And what do you get out of this? She asked. Besides a convenient excuse to eliminate internal threats? His expression shifted, something unguarded flickering across his features for just a moment. Honestly, I get someone who chose my life over their own survival. In my world, that currency is rarer than diamonds. The admission landed between them with unexpected weight. If you're still watching, drop a comment and tell me. Would you accept this deal? A paper marriage to the most dangerous man in Seoul in exchange for survival? Hit that subscribe button because what Nyla decides next will change everything. This story is just beginning, and you don't want to miss what happens when these two stop playing by anyone else's rules. Nyla's fingers traced the edge of the contract. Terms? Standard legal protections. You receive full spousal rights and privileges, access to secure housing, financial resources, legal representation. In exchange, you maintain the public appearance of marriage and provide security consultation using your intelligence training. Consultation, she said dryly. That's a polite way of saying you want me to help you identify and eliminate internal threats. I want you to help me survive what's coming, he corrected. Just like you helped me survive tonight. She looked up at him, searching his face for deception or manipulation. She found only brutal honesty and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. How long? She asked. The contract specifies 2 years minimum. After that, clean divorce. New identity if you want it. Enough money to disappear anywhere in the world, or... He paused. Or we renegotiate. Renegotiate what? Whether it stays paper or becomes something real. Her heart stuttered. You're already thinking that far ahead? I'm always thinking that far ahead, he said quietly. It's how I've stayed alive this long. Nyla closed the folder, her decision crystallizing with the clarity that came from having no good options, only survivable ones. If I do this, there are conditions. Name them. I'm not your property. I'm not decoration. I'm not a trophy you display to prove a point. Agreed. I maintain my own autonomy, my own choices. You don't control where I go or who I speak to. Within security parameters, agreed. And she met his eyes directly. You don't lie to me. Ever. About threats, about business, about anything that could get me killed. I'd rather know the truth and be terrified than be blindsided and dead. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred survival instinct. I can promise you that. Complete transparency about anything that affects your safety. Then we have a deal. She extended her hand across the table. He took it, his grip firm and warm, his pale golden skin contrasting sharply against her deep ebony complexion. The handshake lasted a moment longer than necessary, both of them acutely aware that they'd just agreed to bind their lives together in the most dangerous way possible. When? She asked. Tomorrow. Quietly. Only witnesses we trust completely. He released her hand but didn't move away. The longer we wait, the more time my enemies have to regroup and strike. Tomorrow, she repeated, the word feeling surreal. 24 hours ago, she'd been a nameless server gathering intelligence. Now she was agreeing to marry the target of her investigation to survive the consequences of saving his life. Jamin stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the precise movements of a man who controlled every gesture. My people will move your belongings to the secure residence tonight. You'll have your own wing, your own space. This arrangement doesn't require proximity unless we're in public. Understood. He paused at the door, looking back at her with those cold eyes that somehow softened when they landed on her face. For what it's worth, Nyla Monroe, I should have died tonight. The poison was undetectable, the timing perfect, the plan flawless. You gave me something I haven't had in years. What's that? A future I didn't plan for. He opened the door. Thank you. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the interrogation room with the marriage contract and the terrifying realization that she'd just agreed to stand beside the most dangerous man in Seoul while he dismantled his empire and rebuilt it with her at his side. Nyla looked down at her hands, steady now despite everything. She'd walked into that gala as a ghost. Tomorrow, she'd walk out of a courthouse as a queen. The only question was whether she'd survive long enough to wear the crown. 3 weeks into their paper marriage, Nyla woke to find the mountain estate quieter than usual. The usual sounds of guards changing shifts, phones buzzing with urgent business, the constant hum of Jamin's empire running its relentless course. All of it was muted, almost absent. She found him in his study, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal more of the dragon tattoo that wound up his forearm. He was staring at nothing, which was somehow more unsettling than finding him surrounded by weapons or strategic maps. You're still here? He said without looking up. Where else would I be? She leaned against the doorframe, studying the exhaustion carved into his features. 3 weeks of dismantling betrayals, restructuring alliances, and publicly claiming a wife no one expected had taken its toll. He looked human. Dangerously human. Most people would have taken the exit I offered, His gaze finally met hers, and she saw something raw there. Something that looked like loneliness wearing the mask of power. I'm not most people. She pushed off the doorframe. And you haven't eaten today. How would you know that? Because the kitchen staff told me you sent breakfast back untouched, and lunch never made it past the hallway. She crossed her arms. You can dismantle criminal empires on an empty stomach, but you'll do it poorly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Are you concerned about my effectiveness or my well-being? Both. She didn't hesitate. You're not useful to anyone dead, including me. Practical. Honest. She softened slightly. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't at a business dinner, surrounded by people trying to read your weaknesses? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then exhaled slowly. I don't remember. Nyla made a decision then. Not strategic, not calculated, just human. Get out of this study. I'm cooking. You don't have to. I'm not asking permission. She was already walking toward the kitchen. You've got 20 minutes to wash up and stop being Mr. Park. Just be Jamin for a few hours. She heard him stand behind her, heard the hesitation in his footsteps. I don't know how to do that anymore. She turned, and the vulnerability in his voice stopped her cold. This man who commanded respect with a glance, who ended lives with quiet words, looked lost. Then I'll show you, she said softly. The kitchen staff had learned not to question her presence over the past weeks. They'd watched her navigate their space with careful respect, asking permission before touching anything, learning their systems. When Nyla entered now and started pulling ingredients from the industrial refrigerator, they simply nodded and gave her space. She moved through the kitchen like she was alone in her grandmother's house back in Atlanta. Collard greens, black-eyed peas, cornbread batter mixed with buttermilk, and a touch of honey. Her hands remembered rhythms she thought she'd left behind with her old identity. Spices her mother taught her to balance. Techniques passed down through generations of Black women who turned survival into art. The scent began to fill the kitchen first, then drifted through the entire wing of the estate. Rich, savory, nothing like the delicate Korean dishes or fusion cuisine usually served here. This was soul food. Unapologetic, rooted, real. Jae-min appeared in the doorway exactly 20 minutes later. He'd changed into simple black pants and a thin sweater, his hair slightly damp from a shower, falling forward instead of slicked back. Without the armor of his three-piece suits, he looked younger, more uncertain. More like someone who might remember how to be human. That smell, he said quietly, and something in his voice made her look up from stirring the greens. What is it? Home, Nyla said simply. At least what used to be home. He stepped closer, watching her hands move with practiced efficiency. You never told me you could cook. You never asked. She added a pinch of salt, tasted, adjusted. There's a lot about me you don't know. I'm beginning to realize that. He leaned against the counter, and the casualness of the gesture surprised them both. In 3 weeks of marriage, he'd never once relaxed in her presence like this. What is this meal called? It doesn't have a fancy name. Just what my grandmother called Sunday dinner. The kind of food that makes you slow down whether you want to or not. She glanced at him. Sit. You're making me nervous hovering like that. I make you nervous? There was something almost pleased in his tone. When you forget you're supposed to be the terrifying Mafia boss? Yes. She pulled cornbread from the oven, the golden crust perfect. Now sit before I make you. He actually laughed. Low, brief, but real. Then he sat at the small kitchen table usually reserved for staff meals, and Nyla felt the shift in the air between them. Not boss and protected asset, not husband and wife in name only, just two people who'd survived something impossible and didn't quite know what came next. She plated the food simply. No garnish, no pretense. Just generous portions of everything, the way her grandmother had taught her. You feed people until their souls feel it, baby girl, not just their stomachs. When she set the plate in front of him, Yamin stared at it like he'd forgotten what real food looked like. This is a lot, I know. You don't have to finish it all. She sat across from him with her own plate. But you do have to try it. He picked up the fork slowly, and she realized he was savoring the moment. Not the taste. He hadn't eaten yet. The moment itself, the quiet, the lack of performance, the permission to just be. When he took the first bite of collard greens, his eyes closed briefly. This is different from what you're used to, Nyla finished gently. No. He looked at her, and the walls she'd watched him maintain for 3 weeks cracked visibly. This tastes like something I've been missing without knowing it. Her chest tightened. What does it taste like? Safety. The word came out raw, unfiltered. He seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. They ate in silence for several minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind of quiet that happens when people stop performing and start existing in the same space, honestly. Nyla watched him eat slowly, methodically, like each bite required his full attention. She realized he probably hadn't tasted his food in years, just consumed fuel between strategies. My mother used to cook, he said suddenly, before everything changed, before my father's world consumed ours. Nyla waited, didn't push, just listened. I remember one meal. I couldn't have been more than 7. She made jjajangmyeon from scratch. The kitchen was a disaster. She was laughing. His voice softened to something almost fragile. My father was furious about the mess. I never saw her cook again. I'm sorry, Nyla said quietly. Don't be. He met her eyes. That's the world I was raised in. Control, performance, perfection. Never letting anyone see you as human because humans have weaknesses. He gestured to the plate with something close to wonder. This meal. You feeding me without asking what I prefer or what's politically advantageous. It's the most rebellious thing anyone's done in years. She smiled slightly. More rebellious than saving your life? Yes. He wasn't joking. Because that was brave. This is intimate. The word hung between them like a lit fuse. Nyla's heart rate kicked up, but she didn't look away. Is that a problem? I don't know yet. He took another bite of cornbread, and she watched something in him unravel. No one's fed me like this since I was a child. Like I matter beyond what I can provide. You do matter, Nyla said. The words came out more intense than she intended. Not because of your empire or your power. You matter because you're human. Because you chose to listen to me that night instead of having me killed. Because you're sitting here right now trying to remember how to be more than what everyone needs you to be. Jae-min set down his fork carefully. You see me? Yes. The real me, not the boss, not the legacy. Me. Yes. His hand moved across the table, palm up, an offering. Nyla looked at it for a long moment, understanding the weight of what he was asking. Not protection, not strategy. Connection. She placed her hand in his fingers closed gently around hers, and his thumb brushed across her knuckles with devastating tenderness. I haven't been just Jae-min in 15 years, he admitted. I don't know if I remember how. Then we'll figure it out together. She squeezed his hand. No performance, no masks, just this. They finished the meal like that, hands connected across the table, eating slowly, talking quietly about nothing important. She told him about her grandmother's garden in Atlanta. He told her about stealing books from his father's library to read about places he'd never be allowed to visit. They laughed softly when she admitted she couldn't read Korean well, and he confessed he'd once tried to learn to make grits from a YouTube video and nearly set his apartment on fire. When the plates were empty and the kitchen had grown dark around them, lit only by the soft under-cabinet lights, Jae-min still hadn't let go of her hand. Thank you, he said finally. For the meal? For reminding me what it feels like to be human. His eyes held hers with devastating honesty. For making me want to be more than the role I was born into. Nyla stood slowly, but didn't pull her hand away. We should do this again. Next week. I'll teach you how to make cornbread. You'd trust me in the kitchen? There was something playful in his voice she'd never heard before. I'd trust you with a lot more than that. She said it quietly, but she meant it. He stood too, and they were close now, the table no longer between them. His free hand rose slowly, hesitantly, giving her every chance to step back. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with the same gentleness he'd shown her hand. I don't know what we're doing, he admitted. Neither do I. She leaned into his touch slightly. But it feels right. It feels dangerous. Everything about us is dangerous. She smiled. At least this danger feels good. He laughed again, and the sound wrapped around her like warmth. Then he did something that shocked them both. He pulled her into an embrace. Not possessive. Not performative. Just holding her like she was something precious he'd found unexpectedly and didn't want to lose. Nyla wrapped her arms around him and felt his breath slow, felt the tension he carried constantly start to dissolve. They stood there in the dim kitchen, two people from impossible worlds, finding something neither of them had words for yet. Stay, he whispered against her hair. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. And for the first time since their paper marriage began, both of them meant it. If you're feeling this connection between Nyla and Jaemin, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens when two people start catching real feelings in a fake marriage? Things are about to get even more intense. And don't forget to like this video if you want to see more of these soulful moments that prove love doesn't follow anyone's rules. Drop a comment and tell me. What would you cook for someone to show them they matter? Let's keep this story going together. Later, when they were back in the car, Nyla finally asked, Why didn't you stop him? Because he's already lost, Jaemin replied. He showed everyone who he really is. No one will follow him now. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering when I'll come for him. That's a worse punishment than death. Nyla was quiet for a moment. Then, You're not going to come for him, are you? No, Jaemin said. Because you're right. I'm done with that life. Tonight was the end, not the beginning. He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You saved my life tonight. Again. We saved each other, she corrected. That's what equals do. He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. I should have died tonight. The old me would have walked into that trap and called it honor. But you... His voice caught slightly. You showed me there's another way. Nyla smiled in the darkness. Street smarts beats tradition every time. Is that what they teach in intelligence training? No, she said. That's what they teach you when you're a Black woman in America who refuses to disappear. You learn to be smarter, faster, and 3 steps ahead. Because the world doesn't give you the luxury of second chances. Jaemin was quiet for a long moment, then, I'm glad you didn't disappear. So am I. As they drove through Seoul's empty pre-dawn streets, Nyla realized something had shifted between them tonight. It wasn't about contracts or protection anymore. It wasn't even about survival. It was about choice. Choosing each other, choosing a different path. Choosing to build something new from the ashes of everything they'd walked away from. If you're rooting for Nyla and Jaemin's survival, hit that like button right now. Because what comes next, the final chapter of their journey, will show you exactly what happens when two people refuse to let their past define their future. Don't forget to subscribe because this story isn't over yet. The Seoul skyline looked different now. Same neon lights bleeding into the rain-slicked streets, same glass towers reflecting the chaos below. But Nyla saw it through different eyes. 6 months ago, she'd viewed this city as a mission parameter, a geographical location where she'd extract intelligence and disappear. Now it was home. Complicated, dangerous but undeniably hers. She stood on the penthouse balcony of what used to be called the Park Empire headquarters, her long black hair catching the wind, her silhouette framed against the city lights. Behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Jae-min finishing a meeting. His posture was different now, still commanding, still radiating that lethal calm, but without the rigid tension that used to live in his shoulders like a permanent scar. The meeting ended. Men in expensive suits bowed respectfully and filed out. Not with the fearful deference of the old regime, but with something that looked almost like genuine respect. Nyla watched them go, noting the subtle changes. More women in the room now. Younger faces. People who'd been excluded from power under the previous brutal hierarchy. Jae-min stepped onto the balcony, 2 glasses of whiskey in his hands. He passed one to her without a word, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Even now, that small contact sent electricity through her skin. She wondered if it would always be like this awareness of him, this magnetic pull that defied every tactical instinct she'd been trained to trust. "They're adapting," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. "Slower than I'd like, but adapting. Change is uncomfortable," Nyla replied. "Especially for men who've spent decades believing power only comes through fear. And what do you believe?" He turned to look at her, those cold eyes that softened only for her catching the light. "Where does power come from?" She considered the question. 6 months ago, she would have given him the textbook intelligence answer. Information, leverage, strategic positioning. Now she knew better. "Choice," she said finally. "Real power is having the strength to choose differently." Something flickered across his face. Pride, maybe, or recognition. "I should have died that night," he said quietly. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but the weight never lessened. Nyla set her glass down carefully, turning to face him fully. "But you didn't." "No." His gaze held hers with an intensity that still sometimes stole her breath. "Because you decided I shouldn't. You burned your entire cover, destroyed years of intelligence work, risked execution by people who don't believe in second chances. For what? A man you barely knew?" "I knew enough," she said softly. "I knew you smiled at the kitchen staff when no one was watching. I knew you paid for the medical bills of that guard's daughter without taking credit. I knew the difference between a man who chose violence and a man trapped by it." Jae-min exhaled slowly, and she saw the truth he rarely admitted surface in his expression. "I was dying long before that poison touched my lips. Just slower, more acceptable. Death by 1,000 compromises with men I despised, bound to a woman who saw me as a stepping stone, ruling an empire built on the suffering of people who had no choice." He reached out, his fingers gentle as they traced the line of her jaw. "You gave me a reason to live, not just survive. Live." Her throat tightened. "We gave each other that." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. Steady, alive, real. His arms wrapped around her, protective but not possessive. That distinction mattered. Everything about their relationship was built on that distinction. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked into her hair. "Giving up your old life?" Nyla considered lying, offering the easy comfort he might want. But they'd built something too honest for that. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I missed the clarity of it. Clear missions, defined enemies, knowing exactly who I was supposed to be." She pulled back to look at him. "But I don't miss the loneliness. The constant performance, being invisible." "You could never be invisible," he said with certainty. "Not really, you're too—" He paused, searching for the word. "Reckless?" she offered with a slight smile. "Brilliant," he corrected. "Reckless implies carelessness. Everything you do is calculated, even when it looks impulsive. Especially when it looks impulsive." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting into something more guarded. The council meeting is in an hour. Right. The council meeting. The final piece of the transformation they'd been orchestrating for months, restructuring the entire power base of what used to be the park criminal empire into something that resembled legitimate business more than organized crime. It was ambitious, dangerous, and absolutely necessary if they wanted to build something that wouldn't eventually consume them both. If you're loving this story, hit that like button right now. And subscribe because Nyla and Jamin's journey is far from over, and you won't want to miss what comes next. They prepared in comfortable silence, the kind of synchronized movement that came from 6 months of living in close quarters, learning each other's rhythms and rituals. Nyla changed into a tailored charcoal suit that made her look every inch the power player she'd become. Jamin watched her with unguarded appreciation as she twisted her hair into an elegant knot at the base of her neck. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze in the mirror. "I'm remembering the woman who knocked a glass out of my hand and changed everything," he said, wondering if she knew she'd end up here. Here? Nyla turned to face him, standing beside the most dangerous man in Seoul, about to restructure an entire criminal empire? "Standing beside me," he corrected quietly. "As an equal, as my partner, as the only person in this city I trust completely." Her heart clenched. That woman had no idea, she admitted. She was just trying to survive the next 5 minutes. And now? Now she's planning the next 5 years. Nyla crossed to him, straightening his already perfect tie just to have a reason to touch him. "With you, if you'll have her." His hands settled on her waist, anchoring her. "I'd have you through the next 5 decades if you'd let me." The council meeting was everything they'd planned, and nothing like what the old regime would have recognized. Women sat at the table now, not as decorative accessories, but as decision-makers with real authority. Younger members brought technological expertise that terrified the old guard. International representatives spoke languages beyond Korean and Japanese, expanding influence through legitimate trade routes rather than violence and intimidation. Neela sat to Jamin's right, a position that had caused considerable controversy initially. Some of the older members still struggled with the idea of an outsider, an American, a black woman holding such visible power. But 6 months of watching her strategic brilliance in action had silenced most objections. The ones who couldn't adapt had been encouraged to retire, generously compensated, and permanently excluded from the new structure. "The transition is 70% complete," Jamin said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "We've divested from human trafficking entirely, shut down the protection rackets that targeted vulnerable communities, and redirected resources into legitimate security consulting and international trade. Revenue has dropped 30%, but stability has increased significantly. No internal conflicts in 4 months. No external challenges in 3. An older member, one of the few remaining from the previous generation, spoke up. "And when someone tests this new weakness, when they see profit in our restraint?" Nyla leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Then they'll discover that ethical doesn't mean soft. We've simply chosen our battles more carefully, and we win the ones we choose." The old guard member studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Respect, hard-earned and genuine. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, covering logistics, territory agreements, diplomatic relationships with other organizations transitioning away from their most brutal practices. It was tedious, complex work. Nothing like the dramatic confrontations of the old regime, but infinitely more meaningful. Afterward, as the room emptied, Jamin caught Nyla's hand. "Walk with me." They took the private elevator down, not to the executive floors, but all the way to the ground level, then out into the Seoul night. Rain had started falling, light and persistent, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon. Jamin didn't seem to notice or care. He just walked, Nyla's hand warm in his, no destination in mind. "I used to walk these streets and see territory," he said eventually. "Boundaries to defend, enemies to anticipate, resources to control. Everything was a transaction. Everything had a price." And now? Nyla asked, though she thought she knew. Now I see people, he said simply. Lives that don't revolve around my decisions. Futures that exist independent of my empire. It's... He paused, searching for words. It's terrifying. And freeing. I spent 30 years building walls, and you walked in and showed me I'd built a prison. Nyla stopped walking, turning to face him in the rain. Her suit was getting soaked, her carefully styled hair coming loose, and she didn't care at all. We built the exit together, she corrected. You had the courage to walk through it. He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away raindrops that might have been tears. I love you, he said. Not for the first time, but with the same intensity as always. Not because you saved my life. Because you showed me a life worth saving. I love you too, she whispered. You gave me a place to stop running. A reason to stand still. They kissed in the rain. Two people who'd found each other in the most impossible circumstances and somehow built something real from the wreckage. Around them, Seoul continued its chaotic dance. Millions of lives intersecting, separating, colliding. They were just two more souls in the current now. No longer trying to control the river, just learning to swim together. The new empire they'd built wasn't perfect. There were still dangers, still enemies who saw their reforms as weakness to exploit, still internal resistance from those who preferred the brutal clarity of the old ways. But it was theirs, built on choice instead of coercion, on partnership instead of domination, on the radical idea that power could heal instead of only destroy. And standing together in the rain, Nyla Monroe and Jaemin Park knew one undeniable truth. They were exactly where they were meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please share it with one friend. Our community grows because of your loyalty and love for these characters. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us what you felt, and stay tuned because their journey continues. Thank you for being part of this family.